welcome to another episode of Stuck in My Mind podcast. I am your host, WIZE, and my next guest is the co-founder and president of Reactive Surfaces, a pioneering company in the field of biotech paint innovation. Welcome to the show, Beth McDaniel.
Hi,
Hello.
nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. The pleasure's all mine. All right, so let's just jump right into this because I think this is interesting and anything that has to do with environmental causes and like that. So, can you share the inspiration behind the concept of using algae in paint for carbon capture?
Yeah, actually, so everything that we do in reactive surfaces is kind of we're always copycat in nature, okay? We're biomimic. We're mimicking what's going on in nature. In this case, what we're doing is adding algae to either a surface treatment or a paint and coating, a paint or coating. A coating is just a paint without color, by the way, in order to derive a functionality, which is carbon capture. And algae do that naturally in nature, of course. They capture CO2. That's their function in nature, is to capture CO2 with the help of sunlight and water and convert that into glucose and release oxygen. We all learned that in 8th grade or something. And so we want to utilize, to copy or to mimic that functionality in nature and do that on a surface that we can control and then have a whole bunch of surface area that's doing that work. Now, you asked what the inspiration was. There's actually a good answer for that. Scientifically, the inspiration was something called lichen. And lichen, you're probably all familiar with it, is, you can find it like when you go on a hike and it's on a rock and it's really thin and it's colorful and it's stuck to its surface, a lot like paint. Okay. And my husband, who's the inventor of this technology, actually was doing some scientific research in the Arctic when he came across a lichen that was brightly colored in a place that didn't look like it would have a lot of living things. In fact, he thought it was a paint. He thought it was like a geomarker. And that's when he realized, lichen do a really good job of surviving and capturing CO2. The way they do that is they're an amalgam of two different organisms, a single cell bacteria or an algae. And that algae is combined with a fungus. And the fungus does things like keeps the algae like comfortable, not overgrowing itself, gives it a comfy place to live, like allowing for the gas exchange that the algae needs, allowing sunlight to come in, but not too much UV, for instance. And that fungus provides that kind of protection. And so in our polymers, that's what the polymer or the coating system, that's the role that it plays. And then we add algae to it, much like lichen do in nature. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
I muted myself because I was coughing. Hold on. Okay, so how does the carbon capture coatings technology work, and what sets it apart from other carbon removal solutions?
Yeah. So we have different embodiments for this, but the way that generally it works is that algae is spread over a surface, and that's in and that surface is capturing CO2 very efficiently. We put these things in modules, okay, and we have special surfaces, special polymeric surfaces in which the algae is coating. And we can do a lot of things with paint to enhance the carbon removal capabilities of that algae. But basically, it's a natural system where we're putting algae onto a polymeric system and asking that algae to do what it does. It's capturing CO2 while we monitor it in this modular system. And as we're monitoring everything from the CO2 levels, the O2 levels, temperature, humidity, all of the things that go into the growth of that algae, because we're going to maximize it. And then we want to figure out the perfect time to harvest that algal biomass. And so you harvest it because we want to permanently remove that. If we just left the algae out, of course, then it would re-emit, because that's the natural way of doing it. So we're going to stop that. We're going to not let that algae re-emit the CO2 into the atmosphere, but rather harvest that algal biomass at what we determine is the best point, the highest level, and then you have to go through a drying process where you dry it out, and then you pyrolyze. In our case, we pyrolyze, or we create biochar we put the algae through a biochar process. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but I can explain that. But that's the permanent removal part. So we're capturing it using the surface treatment coatings and stuff like that. And then we're permanently removing it by converting it into biochar, which happens to be a very good thing for the environment, because it can be spread on soils and it helps soils absorb humidity from the atmosphere. And so it makes the soils a better carbon sink also. So it's a good, all around solution in that way. And you asked what differentiates us. That end of life part differentiates us a lot in one big way. A lot of the carbon removal technologies that are existing today, they have different ways of capturing the CO2, but the answer in a lot of cases is just to inject the CO2 underground, like by a mile or a mile and a half underground, into injection wells. And that's not our end of life. There's potential issues with that. I mean, if it's done correctly in exactly the correct spot and it's monitored right, I'm sure there's ways of doing it and it could be a good solution. But if it's not regulated correctly or whatever, I mean, just think about, there could be seismic activity as a result, or going past water tables. And we've just never put billions of tons of CO2 down in the ground like that and tried to keep it there. So there's questions about it. And this is just a different method of removing the carbon.
So what are some of the challenges you faced in developing and implementing this innovative technology?
Wow. How long do we have?
Just give us a few. We ain't got to give us all of them.
Well, there are big challenges, and then there are more micro challenges. So let's say one of the challenges would be that that consumers want a solution that's wrapped up in a box with a bow on it and ready to go, and that it costs less than $100 per ton removed, which has never been achieved. And it has not been achieved. You might have people that are capturing carbon for $100 or less. I'm not sure. I hadn't heard of any, but they're not capturing it and removing it for $100 per ton. And so there's expectations, and the technology is not meeting up with those expectations. Like the industry is not meeting up with it. And we're also very, very far behind on our goals. I mean, the International Panel on Climate Change, and a UN committee, would say that we need to be pulling down in the billions of tons by 2030. That means permanently removing CO2 in order to avoid some of these, tipping points in global warming. And right now we're in the, I don't know, hundreds of thousands. So we're off. We're way off right now. And so some of the problem is, that combined with these expectations that it should be really cheap and easy to do. And I also think that people think this is something that's going to happen in the future, and they don't want to be too worried about it. But it really is something, carbon removal technology is an integral part of any climate change plan that we have, global plan that we have. It's been recognized that it's necessary, and we don't have time to wait. I always say, like, by 2030, we're supposed to have all that done. I mean, that's only 6 years away. I mean, I have stuff on my desk that's been sitting there for 6 years. It's not that long to get all this stuff done. So just a general, laissez-faire kind of feeling about this is kind of holding us back a little bit. But more specifically, what are some of the challenges? We Money and investment is always something that an innovation company has to deal with. Standardization and of the industry, and that's also something that we're kind of, as an industry, we're working through. For instance, this is something that would create carbon offset credits, and recently there was a report that a lot of carbon offset credits are not legit. Either they're a result of fraud or double counting, or they're not being monitored, and maybe the carbon is being re-emitted. So and that causes a lot of damage, because for each carbon credit that's sold, there's a ton of CO2 that's emitted as a result of that. So we can't have any kind of fraud or any kind of miscounting or anything in that industry, because it causes more damage than it does good.
So how do you envision the widespread adoption of carbon capture coatings impacting global efforts to combat climate change?
Well, in our case, with our technology,
Mhm.
um, I call it a Swiss Army knife of applications. So this technology, it's modular, it's location agnostic. We can go stick these modules on the worst wasteland, in a country. Okay, and CO2 is everywhere. You can pull it down wherever you're pulling it down. It will help. It doesn't matter where you're doing it, just so it's effective. And so the way that we plan to get, and the key thing is being able to scale up to a gigaton. A gigaton is a billion tons. And we're talking about having to be able to pull down on a regular basis billions of tons of CO2 annually. And the way that we foresee our technology going in that direction would be a lot of different ways. First of all, like I mentioned, this is modular, so you can go small or big. And so you could have you ever seen a wind farm? Like, I'm from
Yeah.
Texas. We drive out in West Texas, and it's just huge amounts of land, and then wind farms for 50 miles as you're driving by. Okay. So you can have a carbon capture, just a field, of these. You could have just like a wind farm. You could have just a whole farm of these modules working at one time. That's one way, and they can operate on solar. They don't. This process doesn't need electricity being piped in. Now we can use electricity, and we can use waste heat, things like that, and it'll pump our system up. It'll make it more efficient. We can do that if we are, for instance, alongside an industrial process where they're emitting CO2, and we could actually pipe in that CO2 into our system. And so we could be in it like alongside an industry. And there's one thing that algae love is CO2. So the more concentrated that CO2 that's going into our system, the more they love it, and they work harder and harder and harder. So we get a lot more efficiency when we're doing it in that way. Um, and that's not considered direct air capture. It's just a different thing, but it's helpful. And so we could definitely help industry with the, especially like hard to abate industries, steel manufacturers and things like of that nature. We in the oil fields and stuff like that, oil field flares, we could help them with that by setting up these kind of just innocuous modules that would pull down their CO2. Another thing is that these things are small. They're a meter cubed right now. We might go to bigger modules at some point, but a meter cubed, they're in regular shipping carts. They're stackable. I got 20 of them in my backyard right now. And these could be like an individual carbon sequestration tool that you could really, with the help of, it would require some infrastructure, kind of the way like the city picks up your compost.
Yeah.
Okay. It might require something like that. I'm not saying that we have all of that worked out, but it's something that you could do in your backyard. It doesn't take any particular skill or any real mechanical things or a big plant, so that's how we expect we could go to the gigaton level.
So you mentioned under other industries. Can you discuss the potential applications of this technology across different industries?
Well, across different industries, I mean, I would say like hard to abate industries where, well, for instance, well, hard to abate industries, like I mentioned, you can't make steel really without um, releasing a lot of CO2 in the
Yeah.
atmosphere. There's certain industries that are just going to have to use carbon removal, okay? Because they can mitigate to a certain extent, but they might not be able to ever be, carbon free.
Hmm.
And so there's those industries, and there's a lot of those. But
Yeah.
any kind of industrial process, we could help them out. For instance, where we have our pilot plant right now in Tracy, California, is alongside a desalination plant, and they have some emissions, and they wanted to be able to handle those emissions and capture them on site. And so that's where we have our pilot facility right now. So I think it would work, alongside. Another thing is oil flares, for instance, in the field. Um, the reason why um, oil field operators um, burn flares is because that natural gas, they don't want to transport it necessarily. And so they just burn it off. And so if we could do something at the individual flare sites, and we could set up a system like this to capture that CO2, then that would be helpful too. They won't have to build all the infrastructure and pipelines that it would take to transport all that. And then they also wouldn't be, um, releasing so much CO2.
Okay. What role do you see biotech paint innovation playing in achieving carbon neutrality? Neutrality. Oh,
Biotech, well, if you're talking about things like, algae is kind of the main thing, I think, in the
yeah.
biotech side of climate change solutions. And there are other algae-based solutions. For a long time, people have tried to use algae to make as an energy source, and so, like, for a long time, Exxon had these algae ponds, and they were capturing CO2. And so, algae ponds are one such solution, and where they take the algae out of the pond after it's grown up. The problem with, or the distinction between that and us, is we can be a lot more efficient because we don't need as much water, and then you have to dry it out in order to sequester that CO2. It's going to re-release if it's in a wet form. And so in our system, there's just not nearly as much water as you would have in an algae pond,
Okay.
for one example.
So, all right. So, how do you balance the entrepreneurial aspect of your work with the commitment to environmental sustainability?
Well, I mean, probably not that well. And we're not as money oriented as we are oriented towards really helping the solution. But in the position that we're in, there's a special, I mean, we've been innovating with paints and coatings for 20 years at Reactive Surfaces. And so we know a lot about that. And we've been using biomolecules usually as the functional ingredient to functionalize surfaces in that company. And so being in the paint and coatings business means you're kind of a surface area expert. That's what you are also. And so um, we um, we just felt that we needed to use the skills that we had in order to help with the solution, to help provide a tool for humanity. I mean, frankly, it's just when I think about it, and I think, that this is all coming down in my lifetime. And, I grew up in the 70s, and we were like throwing trash out in the streets and stuff. I mean, we didn't care. And I just feel responsible, and I need to, I would dedicate everything to, making the lives of the future generations, livable, and as much as we can, kids, grandkids, mine, yours. I just care a lot about that, and I don't want this to go down on my
To,
watch.
to be fair, we didn't really know much back then. We didn't.
I know.
I'm from that generation, and yes, we yeah, we didn't we aerosol sprays and all this other stuff. These are things we weren't aware of. It wasn't like it's not like now where technology is way more advanced, and we can see our carbon footprint and everything that we're. So it's not it's something that maybe we could have probably started early, but during that time it wasn't something that like you said, it wasn't something that we really focused on. It wasn't something
Right.
that mattered for us. It wasn't. We weren't thinking about the future. We weren't thinking about climate control. I mean, climate change and all these other different things. So, but
We weren't.
it's yeah. So, but it's great to have companies like yours now focusing on that and trying to help with solutions and stuff like that.
Because now we're the adults in the room, right? Well,
Yeah.
and so I feel a responsibility. And like I said, we have this skill set that I think is so applicable. And when we saw the results speak for themselves. So competitively, as far as like the cost per ton of CO2 removed, we're very competitive. And there's a process for determining that amount. As a third party comes in and evaluates the technology based on what their costs are, their operating costs, along with their capital costs, as well as all of the carbon accounting. So you have to make sure that whatever you're doing, whatever carbon is emitted from your process is less than the carbon that you're capturing, or you don't have a net carbon removal, right? And so anyway, that's all balled up into one figure, and we just need to make sure we know that figure is very competitive in the realm of the industry. So we're comfortable with where we sit on a commercial basis, and that it can be adopted on a wide scale. And we also have shown that we can scale up to a gigaton.
So what are the next steps in the development commercialization of carbon capture coatings?
There's so many different steps. So we're an innovation company, so we're constantly optimizing and working on it and getting better and better and better. We've gone through several different embodiments of this technology and on that path, and so we will continue doing that. For instance, there are things that we just aren't. For instance, we're not we're not engineers. Okay, we're polymer scientists, we're biochemists, we have a microbiologist and stuff like that, but we've engineered a solution, and we've got it out, and it's working to the extent that we were evaluated on, which I said came out competitive. And yet there will be when a Brown and Root or some big engineering project firm or something gets a hold of it, then they'll probably build in a lot of efficiencies that we weren't able to do. We did what we were experts in doing, and now we're looking for that kind of partner that can really take it wide, and we're not a distributor, we're not a manufacturer, and so that kind of partnership. And then we do a lot of things like in just socializing the solution, democratizing the solution. I mean, we're working with you, we're about to start working on an advisory role with the government. And we do a lot of just kind of raising awareness of what needs to happen. That's a part of it too, because it's a nascent new industry for most people.
Yeah. You mentioned partnerships. That leads me to my next question. How do you approach collaboration and partnerships with other organizations in the field of environmental innovation?
Well, we always seek out experts in areas. I mean, we bring in experts to help us in different parts of the process. So, for instance, we have collaborations with 4 different universities. And there's 4 or 5. Well, anyway, and and we have experts at those universities that are specialists. For instance, like some of the best algae experts in the world, and they're on our team. And so that kind of collaboration we've got, but we are seeking collaboration, like I said, with commercially, because we think we can branch out in a lot of different directions that way. and even collaborations with other X Prize teams. I don't know, we didn't talk about that, but we're in the carbon removal X Prize competition. Are you
Okay.
familiar with that?
No.
Okay, it's pretty interesting. It's a $100 million competition funded by Elon Musk. It's been going on it's a 4-year competition, and the goal is to demonstrate 1,000 tons of CO2 capture over a year. And so that's what we're going to be doing at our pilot facility, and some other things, modeling costs at 1 million tons and that such thing. But what they're trying to do is drive innovation in this space.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. That's yeah. That leads me. Oh, so what that leads to my next. What are the key factors driving the growth of the green technology industry, and how does your company fit into this landscape?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of what you said.
What are the key factors driving the growth of the green technology industry, and how does your company fit into this landscape?
Well, okay. I think the key factors are just the urgency of climate change. I think people are starting to realize this is. They say that we're boiling frogs. Have you ever heard that expression?
Yes.
Boiling frogs. Yeah, put a frog into water, and if you raise up the temperature enough, it'll start boiling, but it won't really know. It doesn't even realize it. Well, we're in the middle of it. We're kind of boiling frogs. And so the urgency of and some of these reports that are coming out is just, I think it's becoming more known throughout industry, throughout just, the overall consciousness of people. It's starting to sink in. Now, whether they're willing to invest in it and all that stuff is a different thing, but I think people are starting to get concerned. And I do see that there's a driving force in corporations where shareholders of large corporations are demanding that they see these sustainability efforts from their company. And I think that's a real integral part. Corporations need to be a part of this. And, look, in my mind, if you're investing in carbon removal, then and you can take care of your carbon offsets that way, you can take care of your carbon emissions, that way, then, it's up to you to clean up your mess. That's just a cost of doing business. And I think that's what's kind of the corporations are starting to realize, that they need to make that a cost of doing business.
Okay. Can you share any insights into the potential regulatory challenges or policy implications surrounding the adoption of biotech paint technology?
Yeah. So luckily, this is, we don't know of any regulatory that would apply to this particular use of carbon removal technology. We don't even need a building permit. I mean, literally, these are just these, shipping containers in your backyard that have some sort of polymeric surface and growing algae on it. And so we don't face a lot of the same regulatory issues that you would face if you were, like I said, injecting the CO2 deep in the ground. There's all sorts of, you can imagine, all the permitting that would be required to do something like that, along with transporting it to the injection well site. Because then I've seen an estimate that there would have to be 50,000 miles of pipeline built in order to be able to inject all of the CO2 that they need to do into the ground. Okay, so that would circle the earth like 1.5 times.
Wow.
That's a lot of pipeline. And so there's just more infrastructure that is required for certain technologies. And I think that can be a holdup. If you're located right next to an injection well and it's in a good site and everything, then that might work. But that means you can't necessarily go do that everywhere you want. So with our technology, we can put these sites anywhere. And one thing about algae, there's about 50 to 100,000 different species of algae. So when we go to a different part of the world to set up we're looking at different parts of the world. In Africa, we're looking at Canada, and other parts. But when you go to those places, what our system will support is whatever algae that we put in there. And so we find whatever is the local algae that grows best under those conditions, and then that can support it. And so that makes it more location agnostic.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, thank you. This has been very interesting. I've learned a lot. This is something that I, honestly I didn't know this was something that was happening. I didn't know people were actually creating stuff like this. This is very interesting, especially with all the news you hear about climate change and all everybody talking about cutting back carbon emissions and everything. So to see a company really focus on that and try to help ease that burden, it's amazing. It's interesting to me actually.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate you giving a platform for discussing it. Yeah. It's there has to be a lowering of emissions as well, and I think people think because they hear about it a lot and they think, oh, these companies are lowering their emissions and they've got sustainability departments, and they do, and they might be lowering their emissions, but that won't get us there. You have to have carbon removal alongside that too. And so, as far as like if anyone wanted to do something, I would say pick up the phone and tell your representative or your senator, invest in carbon removal. We're going to need that.
Do you see this actually being able homeowners being able to bring this into their homes or onto their properties and stuff to help with this?
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to be the first version of it that people will see. We are really, like I mentioned, Africa, building a site in Africa. Africa has along like the Great Rift Valley has is there's well, as most people know, I mean, there's tons of farmers in Africa, and farmers are good at growing shit. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what we need. We need in this embodiment of a carbon removal technology is farmers, and we think we can help the farmers too, because we don't need good farmland. You could take, you still do your farming and then have this on, a parking lot or wherever on just the land that you're not using. And and earn extra money by like making carbon offsets that can be sold on the market and that kind of thing. And so that's one way that we really think that that might happen first before it's in the backyards of everyone here. Hopefully we'll be able to launch, really quick in a lot of different areas. But I think I think people really want to do something. And if it was something practical that they could participate in, I think they would. And so, yeah, we definitely are interested in doing that, but we might hit the farmers up first because they're really good at growing stuff.
Awesome, awesome. Well, now it's the part of the show where you get the solo screen. You can let people find out where your website, everything, where they can find information on everything your company's working on. And thank you for being such a great guest.
No, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time and what
Pleasure's
you're
all
doing.
mine. The pleasure's all mine. But here you go.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Beth McDaniel, President of Reactive Surfaces. That's surfaces, not services. Surfaces like a table. And you can find us at www.reactivesurfaces.com under the technology. This is one of our technology platforms. And you can also see me on LinkedIn, and follow Team Lycan in the X Prize for carbon removal. And thanks for joining us.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being such a great guest. Don't leave just yet. Let me close out the show and me and you chat a little bit off the air. But thank you.
All right.
It's been interesting. It's something like I said, it was something I was that interested me, and I just thought it would be cool to people to learn about carbon emissions
Mhm.
and how we can help reduce it.
Right.
But thank you. But don't leave just yet.
Okay. I'll be here.
All right. Thanks to everybody who tuned in live. How you doing, Ben? What's up? Facebook user, I am doing good. Whoever that is, I appreciate you stopping by and showing love. As always, big shout out to my Real Wise fam, Poppy J, Brandy J. Love you guys. Shout out to the boss lady. Love you and appreciate you. Appreciate everything you do for us. And as always, a big shout out to all the essential workers out there. God bless y'all. Be safe. You know how your boy Wise does it. Peace out.